Can everybody hear me okay? All right, well, welcome tonight. Thank you very much for coming out. We're going to talk to you tonight about the police services study for the town of Queen Creek. My name is Tracy Corman. I'm going to be kind of helping manage our time this evening and helping kind of field the questions and comments, which will be at the end of the presentation. I'm going to go through a few slides and I'll introduce our panel first. The first gentleman here is John Cross, the town manager for the town of Queen Creek. To his right, Tracy Corman, the assistant to the town manager. And to her right is Jim Keith. He is one of the consultants that assisted on the police services study. I have the clicker. Sorry about that. All right, so tonight's meeting really is about sharing the information from the study. By a show of hands, how many people were able to go on the town's website and actually pull up the study and read some of it? That's wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time, because that'll really help a lot of the questions as well. Also, to explain how to provide comments on the feedback. If you haven't already provided the comments, we can kind of explain how to do that before we get to the end here. And then finally, we want to discuss the next steps for the process. Just a couple of administration items. If you need to know where the restrooms are, you probably found them. They're outside. Cell phones, if you have them, would you mind putting them on vibrate or silent just so those fancy ringtones don't go off? If you don't mind, would you, whenever we have the presentation, please allow the presenters to go all the way through the presentation, and that way we can have all the questions and comments at the end. A lot of times they'll answer questions before we get to the end, so we're hoping that'll happen tonight as well, but then we'll have plenty of time for any questions or comments. The next couple are something that I have to say at every public or community meeting I go to anymore, and that is that nowadays we have to remember that we all have different opinions. We don't all think alike, and that's what makes us great. So I want to make sure we respect the views of others, and if we need to do any critiquing, it's about the ideas and not necessarily the people. Try to avoid side conversations, just so that way it doesn't get too noisy in here and everybody can hear all the questions and responses. 30-second soapboxes just in case somebody wants to go on longer than usual, but I don't think we'll have that issue tonight because we've kind of limited to 3 minutes, I believe, when we do the questions and comments, similar to a council meeting. I always have to have this one, communicate effectively by actively listening. That is, we have 2 ears, 1 mouth. I like to use them in that ratio. That's what my dad told me, and it's been a good guide all my life. And finally, we're all neighbors and friends and family here in Queen Creek, so enjoy our time together. So our agenda tonight is to review the police services study and to answer your questions and comments. That's really what tonight is about. No decisions will be made here tonight. It's really about making sure you have the information to provide the feedback and your comments. All right? So I'm going to go ahead now and pass it over to John Cross, and he's going to kind of tell you how we got here. Why are we even talking about it? What's the history behind it?
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Good evening. I'm going to start things off, and probably just one more housekeeping item. If you've arrived late and you're here to audition for 101 Dalmatians, you're not in the right place. We understand that's the building next door. Thank you for attending this evening. This is an important community issue, and we are very grateful for you taking time out of your busy schedules and being with us here this evening. My role this evening is to explain a little bit of context in terms of the law enforcement study. We're going to go a little bit back and forth with our panel here this evening, and then really a lot of value we hope to be able to get out of the meeting this evening is from the questions you might have for us, and that we'll hopefully be able to answer this evening for you. So let me give you a little bit of background in terms of what the law enforcement, how we got started with law enforcement and doing the study about this particular issue and service. Actually, a couple of years ago, we started at our annual council strategic planning session where we had a presentation and a series of discussions regarding public safety in general and police services specifically. And actually, as part of the council's annual strategic planning session that they have every year, generally in the spring, we're always evaluating our services and programs for efficiencies, always looking at a continuous improvement sort of approach to delivering the best possible service at the lowest possible price and with tremendous value for our community. So law enforcement and public safety in general, really there's no exception to that. And arguably it's the most important service that local government ever provides. So it's a very, very big issue, for the community, certainly now and then for the future. But this last year, in March of 2019, at our annual strategic planning session, the council directed the staff to go ahead and embark on a study, a law enforcement study, which we published and presented to the council last December, on law enforcement, the current status of law enforcement, what are the options that the community has available for policing today, and then what are the options perhaps for the future. So as part of evaluating those particular questions and different challenges, there's a lot of different factors that we had to take into consideration that are affecting this important service. From a population growth standpoint, as you're very much aware, living here, we're undergoing another very strong growth cycle. It's not quite as crazy and hectic as it was in the early 2000s, thankfully. I was here at that particular point in time, but it's still very, very strong right now. We're growing annually at about 6 to 10%, 6 to 9%, and that's a very strong growth rate for us. So that's a contributing factor for all of our services, but in particular law enforcement especially. And we're forecasting that same level of growth actually over the next several years. Our population today is right about 53,000. When I got here in 1996, believe it or not, it was about 3,000, and it's grown pretty significantly ever since. And we've seen that in this region, and Queen Creek is capturing a proportionate share of that. Now, we have a population build-out number of 175,000. I want to just put some context on that number. That obviously will not be a population threshold that will be reached anytime soon. That's probably over 30, 40, maybe even 50 years from now. So I don't want to sound alarmist, or we don't want to sound alarmist regarding what that population number shows, because it's obviously vastly different from today's population. But nevertheless, scoping, shaping services for the community and taking those growth rates and trends into consideration is an important part of what we've had to evaluate with the study. Also wanted to mention what's been very interesting since we've come out of the Great Recession was we always thought housing would be returning at some level and pace, but we weren't quite sure how fast and at what scale non-residential development like commercial shopping centers and other important land uses, what level and pace of investment that would occur for Queen Creek. And we've seen about a 62% increase in commercial growth in the community, a lot of it in town center, just west of this building by a couple of miles, which is the core commercial center for Queen Creek. And that's been part of the goal, but that different dynamic with land uses has an implication on public safety and law enforcement in particular. And that becomes part of the issues that we're examining with the law enforcement study. The other issues that influence Queen Creek and we have to address from a law enforcement standpoint is what's happening in our neighboring areas, in particular Santan Valley, where we have a lot of commuter traffic that's coming from that part of the general area in Pinal County that are commuting through Queen Creek and creating different challenges for our street system and different implications. And that requires some analysis from a law enforcement standpoint. So those are the sorts of issues that we've had to scope, amongst others, but those are sort of the high points that we wanted to mention as part of the presentation this evening. I wanted to turn it over now to Tracy Corman. And Tracy, before she comes up, just to introduce her, Tracy was the quarterback on our team that prepared the study. And we decided to do this study, by the way, in-house, with Tracy leading the effort out of my office. And we had two consultants that we've had on retainer for quite some time that's been advising me and the council on police matters in the community. And one of them is here tonight, Jim Keith, as Teresa mentioned. But the team that was assembled to put the study together was about 12 to 15 people with different disciplines within the organization. And there's one group that's been particularly helpful to us and is a very, very integral member of our team, and that's the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. And I should mention, Greg Lugo specifically, our local captain, he was extremely helpful in providing the necessary access and resources and perspective that was adding, I think, to the richness, if you will, of the study and the depth of the analysis here. And by the way, and we mentioned this in this study, it's absolutely no reflection, the results and findings of the studies, no reflection on the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office whatsoever. They are doing a very commendable job with the resources they've been given to do law enforcement in Queen Creek by the Sheriff's Office. But they've been an extremely valuable and important partner for us ever since incorporation, and those of you that have been here since 1989 know that they were our original police department back then and remain so under today's condition. So with that, I'm going to go turn it over to Tracy. Tracy, come take it away.
Thank you. I am just going to give you a very brief history of law enforcement in the town of Queen Creek. As John mentioned, the town incorporated in 1989, and shortly after incorporation, we entered into our first contract with Mcso. And at that time, our contract was for 25% of one beat. That is the equivalent of about 1 1/4 full-time sworn officers. If you fast forward through all that growth that John mentioned in his presentation, this fiscal year, we contracted for 6 beats or 49 full-time sworn officers. With all of this growth, the town regularly evaluates all of our programs and services to make sure that they're still meeting the needs of our residents as we grow. And law enforcement is just another one of those programs that we regularly evaluate. We first started looking at our law enforcement program in 2004 with our first master plan update that was shown here on the slide as the Burracker study. This study is often what people point to when they make the statement that when the town reaches 50,000 in population, that is when we need to start our own police department. The study didn't actually say that exactly. What the study said was that there are several factors that need to be considered when if the town decides to start a police department. Population is definitely one of them, and the growth and the future projections for the town. But it also depends on the level of service that we are receiving and the town's satisfaction with that level of service, as well as the cost considerations comparing starting a new police department with the current Mcso contract. The next time we did a master plan was in 2016 with the Center for Public Safety Management. And shortly after that, we conducted our first 5-year strategic plan for law enforcement. After conducting these studies, the town council and town leadership established a goal of a community-oriented policing law enforcement program. And Jim Keith, when he's up here to talk more about the study, will explain exactly what that means. Some of you may have seen this large document that I carried over here, and this is the full study. If you're to look at it, it can feel a little daunting, but I just wanted to point out that in the study we mentioned the court-ordered federal monitor that's overseeing Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. And we can talk a little bit more in depth on the details of that, but it's basically for their violations of the 4th and 14th Amendment. We have included in the study, just because it is a burden on Mcso and it does impact our contract with them, we've included the most recent published quarterly monitors report, and that's this section of the study. So that's well over 200, almost 300 pages of the study. So if you do want to read online, this is really the meat of the study for the Queen Creek law enforcement options. At this point, I'd like to go ahead and invite Jim Keith up to introduce the study and discuss community-oriented policing.
Good evening. Thank you, Town of Queen Creek, for allowing me to be part of this process and share some thoughts and perspective with you. Naturally, when a task like this is undertaken, there's some objectives that are put forward and hopefully met as we work through the process. One of those is listed up here behind me is to determine the required law enforcement resources that will be needed in this community, not only today, but in the future. Another one was to conduct a comparative analysis of current services and other police departments in the area, and then to evaluate the delivery of services, the level of services that are provided right now by the Maricopa County Sheriff's Department versus other municipal departments, or one that, if the town decided to move that forward, how that would look as well. So with that being said, some of the expectations and desired outcomes for the town of Queen Creek in reference to law enforcement services. Tracy mentioned community-oriented policing, and that term has been around for an awful long time. And I want to talk a little bit about what that means. And in simple terms, it means the ability to and the capacity to engage the community at all levels with all individuals. There's no bias, there's no, this one gets a little more time than that one. The goal is to try to engage the community and businesses in Queen Creek at all levels on a continuous basis. That's not an easy task. That requires a lot of dedication, a lot of commitment by staff. It requires a lot of resources and time. And so to get the outcomes that the town would like to have, those kinds of things need to be incorporated in the law enforcement services on a regular basis. As you note up there, proactive versus reactive, I want to talk about those two policing structures, if you will, for just a minute. Proactive, or an investment style of policing, is just exactly what I just said, involving community policing. To be able to provide, invest now in what we're providing to the community in those areas that create trust and confidence amongst the public with the police department or police services. And again, I want to emphasize, I'm talking about the study here and not about services that are currently being provided. I've had the fortunate opportunity to interact with those from District 6 as well that are providing services here, and they're great deputies, and they've done a great job from my perspective as well. But in reference to the proactivity and being able to go out and provide additional services that aren't response related, which is the next one, which is reactive or a maintenance-based patrol structure. Because of capacity or capability or lack of resources, it's where you respond from call to call without the ability to actually invest time and resources into developing partnerships and relationships. The development of partnerships and relationships in the community on a continuous basis is extremely valuable in that community trust and confidence piece, which also leads to the problem-solving processes. With those partnerships, we strategically develop problem-solving committees, groups, and then come up with plans and processes as a community and town engaged together to solve problems that come up in the future and currently. That community engagement and community involvement is a key component of the community policing process. And it's not cheap, it's not resource intensive, it is, and it's absolutely takes a lot of time and effort. And if you don't have the resources in place or the capacity in place to do that, it makes it very difficult. Accountability is on the back end of that. Those things that you put in place, the problem-solving processes, the strategic plans that go with that, the partnerships that have been developed, the things that's been decided to move forward, you need to have accountability. Not only accountability for the individuals involved in that, but accountability to the town management, the town leadership, and which involves communication and that ability to communicate effectively. Quality of life. The town of Queen Creek, I'll just tell you from my perspective, and I've seen some different areas around the country, the town of Queen Creek has a great quality of life, and the future is bright. There is a lot of optimism here and a lot of future opportunity that we don't see in a lot of other places. The quality of life here is something that you want to protect at the level it's at and continue to grow and enhance it as time goes on. So the investment needs to be put in now in those efforts that will continue to develop that and maintain that level that you all enjoy currently. So it's an investment in the future with dedicated resources, time, effort, commitment, or it's a reactive-based maintenance program where we try to maintain, because of the capacity or resources that are available to us, the service we have now, and hope that that continues to be good enough into the future. The next slide there, talking about intelligence-based or intelligence-led policing. That has all to do with data, capturing specific information to the town of Queen Creek, and not a generalized category of information that encompasses a larger area that really we have no responsibility or ability to impact. So all of the reporting, all of the communication that goes back and forth, all of the information that's needed to effectively direct the police services, whether you want to have a directed patrol scenario where you're dealing with traffic enforcement or otherwise, or an incident or a situation that's developing in a neighborhood, you've got to have accurate, specific data that will allow that. And that requires a really good records management system, not only information in, but being able to drill down to those specific areas to get that. So crime rate is tied specifically to that in order for us to be able to move those expectations forward. Accurate and relevant reporting. I'm not talking about an officer doing a good report. That's being done, and that'll continue to be done. That's a management issue. What we're talking about is accurate, timely reports that are needed to interact and involve with the current incidents and situations that are arising so that we can be quick, timely, and specific on our resources being put in the right locations to effectively prevent or eliminate future issues or concerns. Communication, I've talked a little bit about that. With a contracted or third party, and it doesn't matter in law enforcement or anything else, there's another level of executive screening or vetting process that goes on before the information actually gets back to the town so that they can make the decisions they need to do. And sometimes, as we all know, communication really depletes as we move it from level to level or person to person. And so communication in a municipal police department, or a first party, if you will, is direct, consistent, and timely, whereas at times it may not be such, where you've got other levels that you have to be vetted through or screened through or responsible to. Same thing occurs with social media. And that being part of communication, getting information out to the community members, and specifically delivering and being able to get out the town's narrative, not filtered by another level of management or something of that nature where, again, it might get depleted or it might get changed a little bit. And timely, being able to get that out in a timely fashion to the community so that it's relevant and impacting them at the time that it's needed to be out there. The town has a very good social media platform in place, and I think most of you have probably seen that, which is a valuable asset to the town of Queen Creek to be able to move that information forward. From the town's specific perspective. We'll talk just for a minute about the contract with another municipality, specifically with staffing, inability to sustain strategic initiatives, delivering directed patrol hours, communication, as we talked a little bit about crime rate data and management, and the federal monitor status and implications have been talked about. All of that is filtered again and impacted by a third party's responsibility or philosophy or directives before it gets down to the town being able to influence that specifically. Staffing levels, hiring, recruiting, retention is a challenge everywhere for public safety and in just about any business as well anymore. The economy the way it is, it's a challenge in every aspect, but there is no doubt it's challenging in public safety at this time. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It could be situations that are created within a specific agency, funding, salary, not being competitive or over, way over the others that are in the area creates problems as well. I want to make sure that you understand there's pros and cons and challenges with whatever process or whatever piece of this study you're looking at. And that's the way we've tried to present that, is that, you know, there's challenges with both or all perspectives, as well as pros and cons with each one. Staffing currently is challenging. The beats, the positions that are available in a contract are not fully staffed. Would a municipal police department be able to do that? That would be the goal. There's a lot of things and a lot of tentacles that go into that environment that's created. The inability to sustain strategic initiatives, I think, is one I spoke on just briefly. But you know, the efforts that are put into problem solving, strategic planning, you know, the resources and the time and effort that goes in, it's the key is to be able to sustain those processes into the future. We have incidents and occurrences all the time where in our departments around the country where we'll start something and we'll develop a process or a program, but we don't have the capacity to sustain it moving forward. And so all of those resources and efforts really are wasted, and the end result is not ever achieved. And so we want to be able to sustain those initiatives that are developed along the way. Delivering specific directed patrol efforts. If we have some traffic congestion or a traffic problem or a speeding, or you know, we're having a lot of accidents, we want to be able to direct our resources in specific areas to help combat that and prevent that or solve it from continuing to occur and continue into the future. That comes with accountability to a specific elected officials and town management. And again, the philosophy of a third party contracted may not have the same philosophies, or may not even be able to perform those same expected results or outcomes because of the processes they have in place in their department. Pros and cons both ways that way. Communication. We talked about that. It's important for the town manager, elected officials to be able to have a direct line of communication with public safety department, to be able to timely have that information passed along and be in the loop on things. That's complicated, again, with some contract situations. The federal monitor standard that's in place, the status and implications, there are some implications at the overall level of a department that's got the federal monitor or injunction issues concerned with it and over it. They're right down to the line staff. And I'm not going to get into too much detail on that. I think you probably have some understanding. If you have some questions with that, we'll dive into that a little bit more. But there are some implications to that and some costs associated with it. And then the Queen Creek Municipal Police Department. Startup costs, it's just like starting up a new business. You know, when we have those things that we want to do or make change or develop something new or different, we're going to have initial costs. But the goal is those initial costs for resources that would be needed to make sure that adequate equipment and staffing and all the other things that go into that are accomplished so that it can be successful is why the startup cost would be initially higher, and then it's leveled out over time, which will be covered here in just a minute. Impact on other town departments. There's no doubt that a police department would have additional impacts on other town departments. However, the town's done a good job at future planning, and some of those positions that would be impacted have already been projected in the budget for other reasons and needs. And so some of that is taken into consideration and account already. The last thing I wanted to mention is the timing. You know, when is the right time? That's a decision that elected officials and town manager will have to make in reference to when is the right time. If it's now, is it in the future? When is it in the future? And understanding that in the future, increased numbers of everything, increased costs, some of those things are things that need to be considered when you look out into the future as well. As Tracy mentioned, there was a study done several years back, which a lot of this was already discovered, and things were put in place, triggers, if you will, to look at these processes. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to Tracy and let her finish up on this.
This is the slide that I think, excuse me, this is the slide that I think most people are interested in. How much would a town police department cost? This is the 5-year projection table that is included in the study. And importantly, I want to mention that this 5-year plan does not require any new taxes or revenue sources, and it can be maintained within the town's current financial projections. I also want to mention that we do have a 5-year financial plan for the MCSO contract in the study as well. And that 5-year projection shows about a 5% increase each year in the contract to account for normal increases in salary and benefits and administrative costs. But it doesn't include any potential large jumps in costs of salaries or benefits. And one of the things that we do want to recognize is that the salaries for MCSO deputies in our study have found that they are about 20% lower than salaries of other police departments. We think this is a really big issue that MCSO will need to address, and it could impact our contract in the future if they adjust these salaries to be competitive in their hiring. The other thing I'd like to mention is that in the study, we include an impact to other town departments and the cost for that associated with a new town police department. We neglected to include in the study the current impacts to other town departments with our current contract with MCSO. And we estimate that those impacts are about $250,000 annually. On average, the 5-year financial plan, the projections for the town police department are about a 10% increase over the 5-year projections for the MCSO contract. One of the questions that we've gotten a lot as we've done this presentation is how is the town handling the retirement benefit costs? We've heard a lot about this in the news over the last few years. And these retirement costs are included in this 5-year budget projection. And I'd like to invite John Cross up to talk a little bit more about what the town has done to prepare for the retirement costs.
Thank you, Tracy. We've been getting the question of pensions and how the town is accommodating pension costs and contemplate a rising pension cost. That's a big topic across the country, certainly is here in Arizona. One point of clarification I think is probably misunderstood is the town actually has within its MCSO contract, about 20% of our contract costs actually goes for existing pensions for MCSO deputies and their command staff. So that's already contemplated within and what we're already paying as part of our existing contract. So as Tracy said, as a going forward perspective, if the council were to make the decision to transition to a new department or continue with the status quo, that pension obligation still remains with whatever option the council decides to go with. Fortunately for Queen Creek, a few years ago, the mayor and council adopted a full funding of pensions policy. And for Queen Creek, our pensions are in the public safety are fully funded. And I think we're still the only community in the state of Arizona that can actually say that. So what we're contemplating, of course, is pension obligations that would be part of either going forward with the existing contract with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office and contemplating growth in that contract and, of course, costs going up with pensions, but a fully funding of those pensions through the policy that the council has adopted and we've adequately prepared and planned for in that particular important area of public safety. And I think that's probably about it, but we're happy to answer any questions you might have with respect to pensions and from a going forward standpoint, how we're accommodating that. I think one of the things that makes Queen Creek unique, in addition to just that particular policy itself, is the fact that since we've emerged from the Great Recession back in 2012, 2013, restructuring our business structure and our business plan, our business model has allowed us to do some advanced planning many years in advance on our financials that has put this community in a position to be able to accommodate those particular costs in a much more different, proactive way than a lot of other communities across the country and certainly here in Arizona.
Before we finish up with this slide, I just want to call your attention to the first year. You'll notice that the full-time FTE stands for full-time equivalent employees, by the way. The first year shown on this 5-year plan shows 4 FTEs. And what that means is that we would take that first year to transition and hire a police chief first and the command staff and an administrative assistant that would set up the department, create the policies, and prepare for the hiring of the officers. So those first-year costs are hiring the command staff as well as all of the capital and equipment expenses that need to happen that first year. And then the following year shows the fully staffed police department with all of the officers. And as John mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we've been meeting with Mcso, with the sheriff and his command staff to ensure that if we do move forward, that we are moving forward in partnership and working together to make sure that the transition is smooth. Okay, as Teresa mentioned at the beginning, we're in the middle of a 60-day public outreach period. We've been meeting with lots of various groups, and tonight is our largest public meeting. We do have an online form that you can fill out comments and questions or read the entire study. And you can see the website is at queencreek.org/law enforcement study. We invite you to go there and leave your comments if you don't leave them with us tonight. We'll be wrapping up the public comment period at the end of this month and providing council with the report of all of the comments that we received. Teresa, I'd like to invite you back up. Yes. How do I-
Can you hear me on this mic? All right. So one thing that I wanted to note too is we had some of those feedback forms out front too. So if there's someone that just doesn't do online or whatever, if you fill this out and leave that with us, we'll gladly enter that for you. Is that fair? All right, so it's time to get to your questions and comments. I've got just a couple, I hate to say rules because that's not fun, but this time is really dedicated to kind of making sure that you understand the study and how it came about. And if you have any questions about the presentation tonight or the study as to, I don't understand that, or how did you come up with that, this is your time. If you don't mind coming up to one of the mics, and that way we can hear you and everybody can hear you. And kind of state your name, if you don't mind, and then just what your question or comment is. We're kind of do it like a council meeting. So it'll be 3 minutes, try and stay around 3 minutes. And then we'll kind of go between one and the other. Does anybody have any questions? We'll go ahead and start. Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. My name is Javier Ramos. I'm a lifelong resident of Arizona. My hometown is Cashin, Arizona, and it's a population of 5,000, so 52,000 residents. It's a huge town here. That's kind of a joke. Thank you so much, community manager, deputy community manager, facilitator, consultant, for being out here, presenting it. I read the study on Sunday, so my information might be a little off, and I want to thank the police officers who are on the audience, and especially from Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. I really appreciate it. For my house and myself, we respect and support the police departments. So I really want to thank them. For example, I called them last week for a non-emergency. They responded within 10 minutes. And I live in Fulton, Queen Creek Station, here in Queen Creek. I support the mayor and the city council on their decisions, whether it's a political decision or it's a financial decision. I don't have the wherewithal. It appears when I read the study that it was skewed towards moving towards a municipality police department. So I support that 100% if that's what the mayor and the council wants to do. I have 2 recommendations, and this is my recommendations. I'm okay with the 1/3 of the study, but the meat for me is the last 2/3 of the study, which of course is the federal court monitoring system. And we'll get it out in the open. This is for Latinos. The population of Queen Creek, is my understanding of the 2010 census, is 17% is Latinos here in Queen Creek, and add that with additional minorities, we're about 20%. So the federal court monitoring was to make sure, and the implications was to make sure that we weren't stopped and violated our 4th and 14th Amendment rights. And I want to make sure that the Queen Creek study understood that that was the implication. When I read the study, the only implication I saw there was that the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office indicated that it was not an additional burden upon them on reporting this information. That was the one sentence in the report. So there was no additional burden or implication upon the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office for doing this reporting, federal monitoring. If we do move toward the municipality police department, I would recommend a citizens advisory board with residents of the Queen Creek. There was nothing regarding the CAB, Citizens Advisory Board, in your study. So if we're going to move away from the federal monitoring, I want to make sure that myself, my kids, my wife is Navajo, our kids are enrolled Navajo. We lived in Maryland for 3 years. When this was going on, my son was concerned, once we cross into Arizona, are we going to get stopped? So that really bothered me when he was a third grader. So I'm really concerned that we want to walk. We love Queen Creek. I grew up in Arizona. We want to walk safely with our 4th and 14th Amendments protected. The second part is more of a technical thing. If we do take over, there's a little bit of a liability in Maricopa County Sheriffs. If they, God forbid, do anything wrong, that the liability is on them. You do have a little sentence in there, but I want to make sure that our risk management is on board, making sure that we have enough insurance to cover that anything our municipality police department does that's incorrect or something that we're covered, that the city doesn't go bankrupt. So thank you so much again.
Thank you very much. Is there anything that you need to feel like, yeah, thank you. John?
Yeah, just to the second part of the comment regarding the risk and the liability issues, we have contemplated that within the overall budget and the financial forecast, and do appreciate that greatly. That's a significant part of the financial analysis, as you can imagine, taking on this particular service and having entirely under the local government, the town of Queen Creek auspices. And we still do have some degree of connection relative to the performance of Maricopa County Sheriff's Office relative to any infractions that they may commit where the town might be involved or in some particular capacity, but it does become a greater liability certainly for our own police department, but we try to mitigate that and do some financial forecasting for those particular circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'll be happy to volunteer in any capacity, or anybody here in the audience would be more than happy to volunteer in any capacity. I think you may be missing that one point on the first part, so be happy to volunteer.
Thank you very much, Javier. Yes, sir.
My name's Matthew Cook. I want to thank everybody for all the presentation. Looks great. You could probably draw up the numbers one way or the other. I'm not as articulate as this gentleman over here, but I've been out in Arizona 20 years, been out in Queen Creek 2 years. It's the best place in the country, no doubt about it. But all I'd like to say is anybody that's dealt with sheriffs in Queen Creek or anywhere in the country compared to police, there is no comparison. The sheriffs are nice, easygoing, great people. On top of that, the American foundation is based on sheriffs, people. As soon as you let a police come in here, you're going to have community this, community that. The mayor could be his best friend, could be his uncle, could be an assistant guy from Los Angeles. Just remember, every 4 years, you get to vote on the sheriff. You'll never get to do that again. Queen Creek could let us vote. Do we want to keep the sheriff? Do we want to keep the police? Now, if they did that and we voted on the police, we could live with that. Just remember, every 4 years, you get to vote on the sheriff. If you don't like the sheriff, you can vote against the sheriff. We can bring a new sheriff in. But I'm just saying, don't ever forget, you're giving up your most important and sacred thing, your voting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Good evening. I'm Robert Milk, and I live over at Rittenhouse in Ocotillo. I've had basically one encounter with the Maricopa Sheriff's Department, and it was on January 25th. My wife was attacked by 3 dogs, and the dog she was walking, which was a little mini schnauzer, was killed. The Maricopa Sheriff's Department was extremely prompt, professional, kind, and showed lots of respect and dignity to my wife. They also were very cautious to make sure that the neighbors in that area were protected. So I have nothing but positive things to say about them in that. The one problem I have encountered, and hopefully this will be corrected, in order to get any police reports, we either have to mail it in, which adds 4 days to the process, 2 days each way, or you have to drive the 35 miles downtown to get it. Now I'm hoping that the information from our police department will be located within Queen Creek so that we can make a short drive to the office and get the appropriate information. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Where would it be located, in Queen Creek? Where would it be located?
Yes, all records would be located here unless there's some unusual circumstances where it, for some reason, has to be at, like the Maricopa County Attorney's Office for some sort of investigation or something like that.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name's Aleda Shorts. I've been a resident of Queen Creek for 2.5 years and new to Arizona. I'm a transplant. My question to you is, have you guys thought about a communication center? Are you still going to contract with the Sheriff's Department for your dispatching services? And like the gentleman said about records, are you going to have your own records personnel? Is that included in your study? You know, are we going to have to jump through hoops to get our police reports? And you're going to need other support services personnel to help run the police department. It can't just run with police officers.
Thank you. Yeah, communication center and records.
Yeah, communication center and records. Yeah, the financial model and the financial forecast that we examined and put forth as part of the study for the new police department option does contemplate having the records on site, records technician. That support staff is part of the financial model, and the staffing model that goes forward is part of that particular option. The first question was the
Communication center.
oh, yeah, dispatch, thank you. Escaped me for a second. Also, as part of our research on this particular matter, all of the different police departments that we met with and gathered information about and were helpful in our analysis of these particular issues, recommended that we contract with a third-party dispatch center with another police department. So that could very well be the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. It could be Mesa PD, and it could be perhaps even Gilbert PD in terms of proximity there. And the financial forecast does contemplate that, that type of contractual relationship.
Are we going to have our own separate phone number that we can call that's dedicated for Queen Creek Police Department? Or are we going to be calling the general number that everybody else from every other town is calling? Are we going to have a dedicated line?
Yeah, will we have a dedicated line for the local PD? We will. Yeah,
Okay.
that will be contemplated and be very clear for residents and anybody that needs to call the line.
Right. I mean, I totally get it for 911. It's totally different.
Absolutely.
Because it goes
Right.
through the towers and stuff. So, okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Curtis Tanner, live here locally. Two questions. The jail, are you going to have a local jail here? Are you going to contract with Mcso also for prisoner intake?
And the second question?
Yeah, we'll just stop with that one.
Oh, that was just someone. Okay.
So the question was about local jail. Will we have a local jail here? We will not have a local jail here. It is not typically the model that is recommended, quite frankly. It'll be a temporary holding facility like we have today in the public safety building in downtown, and then those arrestees would be transferred then for intake. If they're arrested in Pinal County, it would have to go to Pinal County because we have some of our incorporated limits in Pinal County, and if that's where the crime or arrest took place, statute requires booking in the county of origin. We're mostly in Maricopa County, so most of the traffic would go to the Madison jail for the intake there.
Yes, sir.
My name's Bob Adelson. I've been in Queen Creek since 2010. And so more of just a comment. I think Queen Creek has always been good to respond to the growth. We've been proactive in the way it's managed. They moved the fire department on, took it on as its own unit at just the right time. And I think probably now is the time to look at our own police department. It's not going to get cheaper to do 2 years or 5 years from now. I think we get excellent service from the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. And as one gentleman said, you know, the sheriffs have a reputation of being real folksy people, so to speak. And I think this puts us in a unique opportunity, starting at the police department while we have a contract with the sheriff's office, to bring some of those guys on board. They're experienced, they know the town, they know the people here. I think it'd be a great mix. And like I said, it's not going to get any cheaper to do. And to think that we can maintain a relationship with Maricopa County for 10, 20, 30 years in the future, I don't think that's feasible or reasonable to think. So again, I think I would be in favor of a move to our own police department. And also, when you're dealing with something as large as Maricopa County, the bigger the animal, the longer it takes to make change. A smaller department dedicated to our town can be more responsive to our needs. That's all I
Thank you
have.
very much. Thank you. Did you want to talk about some of the sheriffs moving over, that staffing he'd mentioned? No? Okay.
Good evening. My name is Jim Domino. I come from a little different perspective maybe than most of the speakers. I served 30 years in Riverside County, California with the Sheriff's Department, and the bulk of my career was spent in a contract city. So I understand what can and can't be done from the Sheriff's Department side of it. But I've also worked at police departments, so I've seen both sides. If the sheriff's not able to provide what we feel, what the council feels is necessary to protect our city, to me, that's the break point. If they can't provide the proactive level of service because of staffing or because of political problems, then yes, I think it's the right time to look at having our own police department. Certainly cost is one thing. We talked about startup cost in the first year, fiscal year 21, showed that it was going to be around $7 million. And then, of course, you'd have to add on top of that whatever the sheriff's contract was for that year. So the first year cost would be considerably more than $7 million. But that's unavoidable. But as I said, if we can't get what we need through the sheriff's contract, then I think it's time to look at having our own police department. If we're getting the level of service we want, the proactivity is visible, if our citizens are happy, and it sounds like most of them are fairly happy, not only with the interactions they've had, but with, I haven't heard any problems anyone's spoken to about, oh, it feels really crime-ridden here. It doesn't. I think this is a safe-feeling community, and I would be happy to talk to anyone at any time if we do go forward and decide to have a police department. I think I can provide some insight, even though it was from a different state. We're still talking about the same animal. It's law enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hi there. My name is Susan Frischman, and I've lived here for 3 years from Maryland. So the question that I have, my partner could not be here, is retired Prince George's County police officer from Maryland, outside of Washington, D.C. And the question would be, will we have our own academy? Or are we only hiring police officers who have been trained? Like, where is the job force going to come from?
So the question was, where's the job force going to come from, and how are we accommodating an academy process, as I understand it? Well, as you can imagine, in a new department startup, we're estimating about 18 months to fully staff the new department based on the staffing model that we presented. And we anticipate some lateral transfers from other agencies, whether that's the sheriff's office or another PD. The real critical part of that hiring process, in my view, quite frankly, is getting the right leadership in place to make sure the vision of the community and what's envisioned for the policing program is really ingrained as part of that recruitment process. We're going to have to rely on, in the initial year or two, another city's academy process for brand new recruits to be able to be part of that recruitment process for the new department. We would not have most of our department being new recruits. We just is not a situation that is acceptable under the circumstances. But that's what's envisioned for the first few years.
Well, we also have a training facility being built right here. you know, well, it is Gilbert, but they're not, that's not, my understanding is that facility is not just training people for Gilbert. It's located in Gilbert. You know, so that we have the opportunity to work in tandem also with the new academy and training center that's being built right here on Power. And in response to what Javier was talking about, I would hope too that we would look at diversity. You know, when we hire, that we need to make sure that our police force reflects our community, which will address the concern that he raised.
Yes, thank you. Good point. Did you have something to
Teresa,
add?
just on the Gilbert Training Facility, you know, we have a fire department too, and we've got wonderful relationships with Gilbert and Mcso on a lot of our different services, and public safety is a big one that we have a lot of important contracts and relationships with. And we do contemplate having some degree of access to that new Gilbert training facility. However, they have told us that with day one when it opens, it's 90% occupied and programmed for just the town of Gilbert. So that's was more or less contemplated. I mean, their voters approved the bond. It's building the facility for them. But there's still these partnerships that do exist for those opportunities for both on the police side as well as fire.
Yes, sir.
How's it going? Austin Lanter. I live down by the Santans on the outskirts, and I'm going to piggyback off of that. I'm a current member of a neighboring agency. So, like I said, piggyback off of that, when you're talking about creating a lot of laterals, there's the benefits that we have, the retirement and maybe health benefits are much different than what the new officers get now. Are you prepared to address that? In my agency, when I retire, I get health benefits for life. Is that stuff you've considered? Because if you want senior officers with experience, you're going to have to address that. And they're not just going to come over for less than what they have. Does that make sense? So are you prepared to address that?
Yeah. As we've looked at that particular issue from a recruitment and also a retention standpoint, we do feel very comfortable with the plan that's set forth, particularly in the area of compensation and benefits. Whether we continue with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office or start a new PD or even contract with another police agency, whatever benefits are afforded to them through the public safety personnel retirement system are the same for them and would be the same for the town, and we don't have the ability to change that whatsoever. The individual policies with respect to health care benefits is one of those particular issues that we look at holistically for the organization. So it would depend on where the individual and what that new recruit is currently being offered by way of benefits, and we'd have to be able to evaluate that particular issue as part of the recruitment process.
So you're taking that into consideration as far as the laterals coming over, what they have, what you offer, potentially willing to match what other agencies are offering? I know that's super specific and it might be too early for that to be answered. I'm just throwing it out there.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. It's a very important question right now, but we intend to be very competitive on those particular issues.
My name is Bill Brendel. I retired down here from Madison, Wisconsin a little bit more than 4 years ago. After 30 plus years in law enforcement, I'd like to commend all active as well as retired law enforcement here. Thank you for your service. I guess I have more of a statement than I do an actual question. And that is, I agree with the young lady that just spoke over there in regards to a department that reflects the community that it's policing. We had a saying in Madison. Madison, number one, is the most diverse police department in the United States. Number two, it's the most educated. Which helps us to not only police to, but we expect the community to police with the police department. And it helps when you have a police department that reflects the community it polices. Please use us. I heard the gentleman that spoke before I did in regards to he'd be welcome to answer any questions, sit on any panels. I've heard community advisory boards, such things. It's a fabulous idea. What direction I'd like to see it go in, and again, it's a statement versus a question. I see just in the 4 years. I mean, this community has expanded by almost 20,000 people in the 4 years I've been here. And as you see that expansion, and we saw the same thing in Madison, you're going to see more and more urban problems that are going to develop. And you've got to have an agency that can respond to those urban issues as well. So offer my time, knowledge, use me. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, comments? Oh, okay.
Hi, my name's Amy Geider, and I live in Victoria. Sorry, I had to write notes. I read the survey, and I agree with what you guys, I support your moving forward with the police department. I'm a daughter of a father who, can you hear me? Am I okay? Yes. That served 36 years in law enforcement, 21 in Tempe, and then he was chief in 2 locations. Actually, his end of his career was chief in Coolidge, and he built the police department there. So I watched the process there. So assuming there are 3 considerations touched in the study that I'd like to emphasize my support for the police department. The basis for the town enforcement philosophy and values is important for the police leadership and employees believe they're accountable to the elected officials and community members, and they're policing. This is the best accomplished when the responsibility is vested in the people hired and retained by the town's officials who represent our community. Police employee loyalty and commitment to their own community. Police employees, like employees in any profession, are most committed and most loyal to those who make the decisions about their salaries and benefits and provide the equipment and resources necessary for them to do their jobs. Obviously, this loyalty and commitment for contract workers will go to their outside employer rather than our elected officials and our community members. Seasoned and experienced police staff. We need police employees who spend their careers in our community, building their knowledge of our criminal activity, repeat offenders, troublemakers, location citizens who are good resources for information when solving crimes, and employees of a contract agency are naturally more transit to their historical knowledge is hindered. Sorry, I'm like so nervous. But
you did good. Fine.
I think that the Maricopa Sheriff's Department has done a good job, but I see the growth, and I really think that it's time we move forward with our police department.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
Good evening. My name's Steve. I've been living here about 15 years now, and I'm a law enforcement officer in the community. My question was on the one that the gentleman asked her about detention. Knowing that you're not going to have a detention program here, which is fine, have you guys taken into consideration the fact that if you book somebody in Maricopa County, your officer leaves here to go book him in downtown Phoenix will be gone from 2 to 5 hours? Because that's how long it takes to book somebody at Maricopa County, depending on how busy they are and the travel distance to and from. So if you get, let's say, a shift of graveyards with 5 officers working and 3 get arrested to go to book them, now you're down to 2 officers. Have you guys factored that into the equation at all for not having a detention facility?
I'm going to start with that, but I'm going to turn it over to the former police chief to help answer that particular question, because I know he's had to deal with some of those logistical challenges as well. In general, we get into some of the operational strategies, of shift and variable shift management. It's going to be a very important issue for the chief, whomever that is, to be able to address those particular issues. I know the sheriff's office has, over the years, has used a lot of different options there. to try to address that very issue that what you're describing,
Yes.
even for court too.
They have a booking van that goes around and
They do,
they charge
right,
the town.
they do, and that's a relatively recent option, by the way, too, so.
But it's expensive.
Yes, it is, you're right, absolutely. I appreciate that. Jim?
Yeah, I'll just say that that was considered, and has been discussed, and as John mentioned, there are some logistical things that when the chief is hired, he'll be directly involved in making some of those decisions and those final preparations. But yes, it is one of those things we're going to have to overcome and try to make it work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
My name's Allie, and I've been in Queen Creek almost 3 years. This is in regards to how the Queen Creek Police would incentivize staffing. So in the current law enforcement climate, with all agencies talking of staffing issues, it seems like it would be really difficult to obtain 59 laterals. So based on the study, it appears that the pay scale is more competitive than MCSO, but the pay scale would be comparable to other agencies. So what would incentivize employees to jump to Queen Creek?
Did you get all that? Yes? What would incentivize people to come to Queen Creek?
Yeah, the question is, what would incentivize officers to come to work for the Queen Creek Police Department? Well, you mentioned one of them, and compensation, we do think, and what's been rolled out as part of the financial analysis is to have the police department be competitive with the adjacent communities, which is automatically an increase in the cost in local policing to be competitive. And we think at some point, compensation does matter relative to employment and in particular law enforcement, but that's not the only reason that somebody might come to work for the local police department. We think that we've got a unique culture here at the organization in the town, and we're creating something special to help build this wonderful and beautiful community. And we think that there's aspects of that that might be, although intangible, very, very appealing to somebody that might want to be part of something new and help build and form the vision from the ground up and be part of sort of shaping that, painting the mosaic, if you will, of a new police department. The culture within the organization, depending on where they might be coming from, could also be a variable, although it's unpredictable. But some agencies have a different style of management. The hiring of the chief will be a very important position for the department. Obviously, that individual can help and be such a critical part of establishing the culture within the department. And starting immediately on that particular issue and establishing, those particular norms and protocols from that leadership level, hopefully that is also part of the recruitment effort, if you will, that really gets out as part of that transition phase. So those are some intangibles there, and ultimately we do recognize, we're not naive about it, that individuals will have to look internally to see if that is going to be the whole package, enough of a particular incentive for them to want to take a chance and pursue these particular opportunities. We do think too, just one last comment on it, is professional growth and opportunities and how we invest in our employees. Our employees, we believe, are our strongest assets to perform the public services for the community at the best possible price and the greatest value. And we invest heavily in them to make sure that they feel that they are cared for, and we're deeply committed to this common mission. We have the lowest turnover rate of any city in the valley, and we think that says something.
I'll just add, from my perspective, John's exactly right on, the salaries and benefits and those kinds of things, but the environment that's created and the opportunities that are created for some that may be in an environment where, it's stagnant or they have no movement or those kinds of things. I mean, there's a lot of intangible things that really attract individuals to be part of something, as was mentioned, maybe something new and moving forward. But I feel like the town has got, as was spoken about here, some real unique qualities and characteristics about it that are going to drive some folks this way. So,
Yes, sir.
Good evening. Thank you for being here and opening this up to everyone. I've been a resident of Queen Creek for about 10 years. Just love this place and the way the city's managed. Everyone seems to do a great job. I retired from a small town in Oregon by the name of Damascus, We had just incorporated. I was the mayor, and that doesn't mean I know any of the answers to this at all. But I wanted to offer one suggestion, which I thought was had worked out very well. We also did not have in our IGA with the county, there were some judges that we could use, but we found that by hiring our own judge, who was actually just part-time, excuse me, he could and he would deal, especially with youth, in a rather a kinder way than they find in a normal court. Even working with them to the point of if their grades were not quite up to par, he would make a deal with them. You know, you get your C's up to A's or D's to B's, and he would actually vacate that crime or the sentence. I've forgotten the correct nomenclature there. But anyway, it just worked wonders for the youth especially. And I have, since I moved here, I've been a kind of a volunteer chaplain at La Palma and Red Rock, the prisons down south, close to Eloy. And I found that so many of the youth there that were from California, those, many of those that were in there didn't have a father they could relate to. And they could relate to this judge because he would treat them fairly. And so it put these young people on the right track, or got them back on the right track. So that would be my suggestion for you. Otherwise, it looks like everyone's done their homework, and I wish you all of us the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jared Roslin. We reside over in the Villages here. My family, we implanted here about 5 years ago, my wife and our children. We enjoy the community. It's a great place to be. We're excited for the future. More so, a couple of comments. The young lady was asking about compensation for the, you know, what is the benefit of a lateral officer coming over to Queen Creek? So I would throw something at the council and say, so there are officers that reside here within the community, and those individuals have a vested interest in this community. So when you talk about compensation and so forth, the compensation is looking at our youth, the involvement that we have not only with our children, but then our families. My wife is employed here within the community. As many of the people here within the community, they want to stay here. You know, we don't want to have a commute to go all the way into Phoenix or so forth. So, you know, with that being said, I would hope that the council would take into consideration and look at, hey, if you have an extremely qualified individual that has a lot of training, a lot of experience, a lot of positive things that they could bring to the department, look at those individuals first that have a vested interest in the community, that have that tie. So, secondly, one of the comments I wanted to make, and I'm not sure as a community that you guys understand, there are so many federal grants that are out there and that are available. So I'm sure that you guys have done your homework, obviously. One of the things is just looking at a crime analysis based on, you know, what crimes are occurring here within the community, what needs are we looking at, and then bringing on somebody that's an amazing grant writer. So we're looking at the cost initially of what this is going to be, and yes, it's going to be millions of dollars, but you bring in the right people, the right personnel that have that education and that background and understanding, those grants are written, and those are federal grants. That's money that we don't have to pay back as a community. So that's only going to help us. So just kind of a little bit of food for thought. Some of us may not know that, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Good information.
Hi, my name is Jake Cooley. We've lived here, me and my family, about 3 years now. We moved from California. Another thing to think about, I understand it wouldn't be from the beginning, but I volunteered with the Sheriff's Department in the Citizens Patrol capacity, and a lot of the talk is about community being close with law enforcement. And what we found was, you know, and they were talking about, well, if you transporting, you're going to lose officers. A lot of things we did was we would take certain paper calls for the deputies, we would do vacation checks, all things that take time that pulls from the officers from away. So there's another thing, and then you have the community, with the schools, we would do a lot of things with the schools and with the kids, and that was all volunteer. And we saved a lot of money within our city, within that capacity, because you had people in the community volunteering for free, which ties the gap between law enforcement and the community. So they see us working together as a team. So just something to think about for the future is a volunteer stuff.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Andy Fritz. My wife and I have lived here almost 17 years. I just want to reinforce the quality of life that really seems to be a priority here in Queen Creek. We've seen it grow. We've seen the facilities. And one of those things is, as John said, public safety is a real big part of a positive quality of life. We support the forming of a municipal police department. I think the time is right. Just as you did the fire department a number of years ago, the fire department is growing as the community grows. The police department will be able to do the same thing. We saw the 5-year plan, and I think that's really important, that you don't get behind the 8 ball and you can grow as the community grows. So we really are in favor of looking at the municipal fire department, police department. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Roger Nash. I'm a native of Chandler Heights and Queen Creek. I've spent a short 40 years in law enforcement. I started in a department in Chandler when it was less than 15,000 people, retired when it was the 5th largest city in the state. I think the time has come to start our own department. I did sit on one of the first studies that the town did a few years ago on law enforcement and the community and so forth. I would echo what has been said today or this evening about diversity and community involvement, so forth, so on. I do believe the key is community policing. I also like the idea that has been proposed that you have a lot of opportunity to draw from experience of law enforcement professionals that are retired in the city. And I think to start a department, you would be remiss if you didn't draw on our experience. And it can be volunteer. And I think you can get a lot of bang for your buck. It won't cost you a thing. That's all.
Thank you very much.
Hi, good evening. My name is Larry Kratzer. I live in town here. So I had a question. I read the study, and the study addressed how the town might look at specialty units like K-9 SWAT, homicide, those sort of specialty units. And one of the things that the study said is that we would look at, excuse me, entering into IGAs and task force. So my question is, long-term, is that the plan? If the town moved to start their own PD, would we look at just remaining with IGAs and task force for those specialty units? Or would the town at some point down the road, whether it's 3, 5 years, 7 years, look to become a little more self-sufficient and create those units down the road? I think one thing that a lot of people, maybe there might be this misnomer out there that like fire department with their mutual aid agreements, IGAs and law enforcement and task force are a little different. So fire, the closest unit will go. With fire, if you have an IGA with the nearby agency for helicopter or any of those services, they will provide those if they're available. So, you're a little limited on what you're going to get from that. And I don't think Queen Creek needs a helicopter right away or anything like that, but homicide or task force for special victims, those sort of things. The other thing is with those, one of the big things in the study was having a little bit more control over some of those direction or control and communication. But when you are in an IGA or a task force, you don't really have that say or that involvement in how they operate. So you're kind of back where you're at currently if, the frustration is there's not much input or involvement. So I'm just curious what the town's thought is on that long term, if it would be to continue with IGAs and task force for the long term, or would they look to have maybe more of a self-sustaining role at some point in time?
Thank you. That absolutely was considered. IGAs, MOUs, whatever you want to call them, are things that are used across the country to share resources and accomplish those tasks or needs when they're needed. It doesn't make sense to have a SWAT team today of 20 people if the need is not there. And so I think it's important for all of us to understand as if that's the direction the town goes to create their own municipal police department, is it's an evolution. And, some people think, well, we got to have SWAT and narcotics and all those different, specialty teams that you mentioned right up front. And you do have to have access. And the key is to train some of our people in the town's police department to participate in a consolidated team for the period of time that works. At some point in the future, there absolutely will be a need for, I can't say which team or which specialty unit, but there will be a need at some point to have maybe your own street crimes team or your own narcotics unit. But to speak to your, there is some accountability that you let go or don't have some sense of control over when you do an IGA or an MOU simply because you're utilizing people from other agencies. But if it's set up properly and they train together and they understand each other's goals, objectives, expectations, and outcomes, and they're held accountable along with everything else, they work pretty well. But absolutely into the future, at whatever point that is, determined by growth and need in the community, there will be some of those that'll have to be developed locally.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How you doing this evening?
Good, how are you?
Doing well, thank you. My name's Tom Shirkey. I'm a resident here in Queen Creek. One of the questions I had was when you guys begin this hiring process, I understand, you're going to set up your command staff and everything else before you get that going. What measures does the town plan to take in that process? Because obviously, there's a lot of officers out there and you're wanting seasoned officers, but you also want to make sure they're the right fit and their background and everything else is just going to be as important. It's not like a standard HR hire. It's obviously not a lot more entailed. There's a lot more into it. So that's going to be a concern to make sure we get good qualified people, especially with the market being the way it is in law enforcement and every agency hurting for bodies. The town's going to have to really have it set up to where they can accommodate that.
Process for hiring.
Yeah, the process for hiring of the new department, we have not fully fleshed that out yet in all candor. This is such a larger public policy question that our council still has to determine, whether or not to pull the lever for a new department or maintain with the status quo at the sheriff's office. And that being the first issue that they, first threshold question that they've got to wrestle amongst themselves. But we have a lot of experience here and a lot of partners within the region that we expect to be able to use to be able to develop a system that hopefully is meeting the ideals, vision, goals, and philosophies of the town, and then of course the leadership that ultimately is hired for the department if that's the direction we go. I feel very confident that we'll be able to put together a process that's going to be fair, addresses diversity issues within the community, and we try to, as best as possible, have the right fit. Sometimes generally speaking, the evaluation process for a new employee is really 3 phases. That first phase of recruitment, which is the testing and evaluation phase. It's also the interview process that I consider separate from that testing and evaluation. And the third is the probationary process. They pass all three, that's a fit for us, and we're hopefully going to have a lot of success with that.
Okay, playing off of that, that process, you guys have been most familiar with the way MCSO handles things. Is that who you'd be tapping for suggestions or direction on how this process should go? Yes, you mentioned you have a 3-tier process with new employees. For a standard officer to be hired, you generally have a written test, a physical test, an oral board, a command board, a chief's interview, a polygraph, a background investigation. You have a lot that's involved, which is, again, I know that HR is the same. I mean, you have your process, but you're having to set that bar and that standard so much higher. Who are you going to look for to help give you that direction? I mean, are you just going to base that on what a chief suggests when you do begin that command board process of getting those people on board? Or are you going to look to neighboring agencies who have established themselves, obviously within the valley, as being top-tier departments?
Those are all excellent questions. We're always very interested in best practices, in time to hire and onboarding. We've had a lot of success, quite frankly, in all of our other positions, even in fire, being one of the fastest onboarding of any community out there. I do recognize exactly all of you that you're saying with respect to the Arizona Post requirement certification process, the interview, very, very different for law enforcement. But we really expect to be able to employ some best practices as part of the process. And I expect that we probably will be consulting the Sheriff's Office, other local PDs as well. And there's a lot of lessons learned there and as part of those conversations too.
Just real quick, as Mr. Nash, former Chief Nash had pointed out to you guys, use your resources that are in this community. You've got a lot of retired law enforcement. We're now in that realm where a lot of those people who have a lot of that experience are starting to retire. They get to that point where they're in the system and they need to retire, but they're going to look for something to do to help them continue to enjoy their lifestyle. But I think being part of that process, you guys should hold on to those types of people and use them for your benefit, because a lot of them are going to do it for free just to be part of something big. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Francine. I just moved to Queen Creek in November, and I think I'm in Queen Creek. I live in Ironwood Crossing, so I don't know what's going on there. Maybe somebody can tell me. But anyways, my son is a police officer, and I'm just I'm a mom, so I'm worried. Are we going to make sure that we have all the proper equipment for our police officers so that they are safe? Is my first question. I'm sure you guys have addressed that. But secondly, with the concerns about diversity, what kind of recruitment efforts will you be making to try to recruit some minorities in this community, good quality minorities who will be the future and the promise of keeping our police department, which I do hope we have, diversified and connected to the community?
Thank you. First question was equipment.
Yeah, in reference to equipment and technology, and obviously the town, if that's the direction they go, that will be one of the number one pieces that is addressed and considered, and the proposal going forward, if that occurred, it absolutely encompasses all of those things. The second question was dealing with
Diversity and hiring.
diversity in hiring and recruiting. I think several of you have mentioned the importance of reflecting our community, if you will. That's part of that community policing philosophy, and being innovative and creative. Just from my experience talking with the town department directors, they're engaged, they're ready to do that, they're ready to put everything on the board to look at and consider as they do that recruiting process. So I'm confident that if that's the direction the town goes, they'll reach out in every way possible to select the best to the gentleman that just spoke here, quality standard that's going to reflect what the town wants, what the town expectations are, as well as the diversity within the town.
Any other questions or comments? I don't want to cut anybody off. Okay, well, oh, sure.
I'm Nancy. I live here in Queen Creek and have since 2013. My question to you is this, having law enforcement in my family, my concern is not just the diversity. I think, yes, it's important, but what are you doing to make sure that every individual you hire is qualified to do the job?
So aside from just the diversity concern, what are you doing to make sure that every individual hired is qualified to do the job?
Fortunately, we have a fairly rigorous system of hiring in Arizona in general anyway with the Arizona post-certification process and a lot of experience with very well-seasoned departments and apparently a lot more resources living in the community that might be helpful with that too, that I've come to learn even though I've been here for quite some time. But we really do intend to be very rigorous as part of that particular process. I'm not prepared tonight to spell that out in detail, of course, but do know that the vision, the quality of the individual, any past performance and accommodations that we recognize through that recruitment process from laterals that might be interested in coming over to the organization, that's all going to be all part of that evaluation process, as you would certainly expect.
Okay. I want to make sure, just as a community member, that I've seen it go very political in different police departments, that we're looking more at the qualifications and less on the political side of it.
Did everyone hear that? Okay. Did you hear that? Oh, yes. She said that in some other places, she's seen it be more political and less on qualifications. She just wants to make sure that that's not the case here.
Yeah, one of the from a structural standpoint of how the government is organized, for lack of a better way to describe it, we operate under the council-manager form of government. And what that means is, and the whole premise behind that form of government is to get at that very issue. That form of government was trying to create a, more or less as best as possible, a seal, almost envisioned as a hermetic seal. Of course it's not, but between the policymakers, the elected officials, and the hiring of the personnel that's going to operate and run and implement the policies that the council adopts, and that's our form of government. That's the manager in my particular case who has the hiring and firing authority of the police chief, the fire chief, and all of our department heads. The mayor and council does not have the authority to hire and fire personnel. There's three people they do have the authority to hire and fire, and that's the town manager, town attorney, and our town clerk. But beyond that, they cannot interfere with personnel issues and influence it politically based on that structural way and form of the government.
Sir?
My name is Robert Burgess. I've lived in Queen Creek since 2006, and I'm just kind of wondering, could you speak a little bit to the judicial aspect of it, the court system, how that would be handled, maintained within Queen Creek, or perhaps an outside entity? And also, could you talk a little bit about that first year of switching from MCSO to our own force? Would that be phased in? Would that be just cut it off at the pass? How would that be handled?
First question was the judicial system or the courts, how would that be handled?
Yeah, and on the judicial system and the courts, we have looked at that fairly thoroughly as part of the study process. We are envisioning continuing along with our current system of how citations and civil citations and criminal citations are handled through the county court system today, and relying on that particular structure and operating and interfacing with our municipal police department. Jim or Tracy may want to add some more detail to that particular part of the answer. At some point in the future, there's always the option, if the council wants to start its own municipal court, but we're not, as part of the study, it wasn't a finding that, or conclusion that staff came to do right away, or even within the first 5 years. largely because of the expense involved with respect to doing that. Secondly, the other part of the transition phase, yes, the transition phase, that first year startup includes hiring the 4 personnel, the chief plus the 2 assistant chief lieutenants, and then one clerical staff, and a lot of equipment, and a lot of the biggest cost of that equipment is actually the information technology piece, the records management system, anything that from a geographic information system that needs to have interface with that particular reporting characteristics and data managing. And that's really the major lift as part of that. During that first year, we will still have the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office and need them under contract as part of that transition. We're envisioning an 18-month transition process would be necessary. So you'd essentially have a period after that first year where, depending on how hiring is going, the Sheriff's Office could very well be still in their full capacity for the full 18 months, and we contemplated that within the financial forecast.
Going back to the judicial side real quick, my understanding, I may be incorrect, is that the fines, the penalties, those monetary payments typically stay with the entity wherever it is, in whichever jurisdiction. Wouldn't it be beneficial to start our own and use those funds to fund part of that establishment?
Yeah, if that was the intent of your question, you are correct that if we had our local court, a municipal court, we would have a portion of the total fines that might be collected on any particular infraction or citation. We don't keep it all, and that's structural. That system is established by the Arizona Supreme Court through their rules and policies through the court system. So we don't keep it all, and as we've analyzed courts through a separate study that we did, there still is a fair amount of subsidy that's required from general fund to bring over to support the court system. So right now, the recommendation, if the council were to go in that particular direction, is not move that quickly in the court just because of that subsidy that would be required.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, well, I don't see anyone else running up to the microphones. I want to thank you all for your time tonight. Thank you for taking the time to read the study. Please make sure that you fill out one of those feedback forms either online or here tonight, and we'll submit it for you. And we'll just be walking around, so if you want to catch any of us afterwards, thank you all. Good night.